How many of you know what it means when your check engine light comes on in your car? It means ignore it, right? No. Or just as bad when that little tire, low tire pressure light comes on. Don't ignore that. My wife's grandfather, full of wisdom, one of the things that he always told her was the only things between you and the road are your brakes and your tires. Make sure that those things, if nothing else is working well, make sure those things are. So when you see those lights come on, you need to do something about it. I actually know somebody, and I'm not going to say who, and nobody in here knows who she is. It's not Lindsay, so I'm not throwing my wife under the bus here. But I knew of somebody who would actually take a piece of like electrical tape and put it on her dashboard because she didn't want to see the light. It's a ticking time bomb, and she didn't want to be reminded of it. But if you ignore the warning lights, eventually you're going to have a breakdown. And the same is true in life. If you find yourself burn out, you need to make Sabbath a priority so that you can physically, so that you can psychologically, and so that you can spiritually recharge. You can change your oil. You can rotate your tires. You can get a tune-up. Spiritually speaking, you can do all of those things by honoring the Sabbath. I'm going to give you an update here on some full disclosure. And one of the reasons that I need to do this is at the General Assembly this past week, like I said, it was long days. And 8 o'clock every morning, I was in the business sessions. They opened with prayer, and the business began at 8 o'clock, or 8:30, I'm sorry, and it went all day. Well, these long days take a toll on me. And my dashboard is lit up like a Christmas tree. So not only is my tire light on, not only is my check engine light, low oil, all of those things, my dashboard is lit up. And I wanted to give you an update regarding my health because recently I got some news. You guys have been with me through this journey. You've seen various things. I've had what I assumed was a bad back for years because of back pain. But I received a diagnosis in the past 6 months. The weakness that I've experienced has accelerated. And last month, I was diagnosed with myopathy, which is a series of muscle disorders. I didn't understand what it was until I was there, and now I have a better understanding of it. Myopathy is the title, and then there are different subcategories of myopathies. The way it was described to me is it's not cancer, but cancer is the big diagnosis, and then, it could be this cancer or this cancer or this cancer. Well, let's push that aside. That's just an analogy. It's not cancer. Myopathy is muscle disease, and the way that it was broken down for me is that my muscles are wasting. They're releasing enzymes into my blood, which gives indication that they're weakening, which is why I had to install the rail. It's why my stairs are my enemy. I have a test scheduled with a neuromuscular specialist that will do a muscle biopsy and will determine which one of those things it could be. They think it's probably either an autoimmune disease or muscular dystrophy. And the good news is that it's not terminal. I'm going to be around for a long time. I'm just going to be slow going. But anyway, basically my muscles break down faster than I can build them back. And it results in pain and limited movement. And while my mobility is affected, it's something that I can get through, especially once they've diagnosed it a little bit further and find the treatment. But that being said, I wear down quickly. There are times when physical exertion just kind of wipes me out. And mornings and evenings are the most difficult physically, and I have to be intentional about rest. And that's difficult for me. I am I want to go. I got to get stuff done. and you guys have been great. You guys, for the entirety of all of this, people have been checking on me, telling me, you got to take care of yourself. You got to get some rest. And that's a reality. I do. I am blessed because of your compassion, and I'm thankful that God has placed me here for this season. I'm also grateful that before I went to Indianapolis, I was able to get 2 days in the mountains to rest, to just kind of sit back and enjoy the fact that it was in the 50s at night, and I slept with the windows open, and it was beautiful. Sorry, don't be jealous. It was only 2 days. Because I went to Indianapolis to participate in this biannual church conference where we deal with the business of our denomination. And as an ordained bishop, I am part of the bishop's council that makes these decisions. So while I was there with these long days, my hotel was a mile I tracked it, from my room to my seat on the floor of the general council, it was 1 mile. And so by about Wednesday afternoon, I decided I was going to take an Uber every time. I wasn't going to keep walking that long. My check engine light was on. My check engine light is still on. I laid down this morning about 2:15, and I love you guys. When service is over, I'm going to greet everybody, and when the last person's gone and this building is locked, I'm going to take a nap. But I'm looking forward to slowing down over the next few weeks. That's part of what this Sabbath is. That's how we go about Sabbath. It was built in so that we could experience the rest of God. So I'm going to do a few things over the next couple of weeks, the rest of this month. Some things that give me life. I'm going to go to a couple of baseball games. Obviously, I like baseball, so I'm going to go to a couple of baseball games because those I can sit and relax and just enjoy the pace of baseball. I may do some traveling because that brings me life, seeing things I've never seen, experiencing new experiences, seeing the beauty of God's creation gives me life. I'm going to be here on Sundays. I'm not missing any Sundays for a while, so I'll be here. But I'm doing things that help me experience the rest of God because that is what Sabbath is. Sabbath is God's gift to his people. It's right there in the 10 Commandments. In fact, it's the 4th commandment. It's almost stuck right in the middle. Exodus 28 says, "Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy." There's more, and we'll look into that text a little bit deeper in just a moment. But right there, it's just simple. It's remember the Sabbath, keep it holy. God gave us that command. But that's the most easy and most common one that's broken. That was Israel's great sin. They ignored the Sabbath. They ignored the time that God had given them to consecrate and set aside to be with him. And because of that, they were deceived, they were led into idolatry, and they were tricked by the enemy into being led away from God. So my question for you today, are you receiving the rest of God? Not the rest as in the completion, but the rest as in actual rest of God. I know it's not just me who experiences the stress of work and the pressures of life. You have a demanding job. And even those of you in retirement, you have stresses in life that oh man, I thought once I got to this stage of life that it would be easy, that I would just kind of kick back and enjoy not having to live in the rat race but you find yourself in that situation where, well, how can I rest when I have all of this? Maybe you're a parent and you have a kid that's just wearing you out. Or you're raising a grandchild that you did not expect. All of these things are contributing factors to why we need the rest of God. If you don't allow God to renew you in a season of Sabbath, then you're actually doing violence to yourself. And yet we wear that as a badge of honor. I'm busy. I've got so much going on. I was in Indianapolis walking all over that convention hall, and I caught myself doing that. Hey, Rodney, how are things down in Florida? Oh, you know, just keeping busy. Why? But that's what we do. I heard this quote yesterday, and I loved it and wanted to include it in this. We are human beings, not human doings. God created us to be. We live in a culture, though, that assigns worth based on what we can produce, based on what you can do and how you can be help or what you can give somebody else. Jesus spoke about the rest of God in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. He said, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." The rest of God. He said, "Come." God created you for the Sabbath rhythm. Work 6 days, rest on the seventh. Work 6, rest 7. And he not only did he design it that way and was that example in the first chapter of the Bible, he reiterated that by placing it in his top 10 list of commandments. Now, going to that time when God gave the Israelites those commandments, they were leaving Egypt. They had come out of slavery. As slaves, they had been working constantly to build Pharaoh's empire. They were slaves. It's not why they originally went to Egypt, but through 400 years, their situation had changed, and they found themselves as slaves. There was a Pharaoh who enslaved them, and he was a taskmaster. And so it was time for them to be delivered. After 400 years of slavery, God sends Moses to speak to Pharaoh. During that time, he sends 10 plagues to show his might, his authority, and after the last one, the death of every firstborn in Egypt, every firstborn that did not have the blood of the lamb over the doorpost, Pharaoh finally lets them go. So they're out in the wilderness, and that's when God prepares them to enter into the promised land. Now, it takes about 8 hours today to drive from Cairo, Egypt, to Jerusalem. And I say today, that would be unencumbered. Actually, today, because of the conflict that's going on there, it takes longer. But as far as how fast a car can go between the two places, it takes about 8 hours. If you were on camel, it would take about a week. If you were walking from Cairo to Jerusalem with 1 million plus people, it should take about a month. But God delayed the arrival of his people. He delayed them by a generation. He took them on a 14,600-day journey through the wilderness so that he could purge them of their slavery mindset. They had lived for generations as slaves. It's all they knew, which is why constantly when you read through Exodus, you can see the times when they would say, well, in Egypt we had this. Well, back in Egypt we had that. You've let us out here to die. At least in Egypt we had this. God had to purge them of that slavery mindset. And so in the early days of their wilderness journey, he gives them this list found in Exodus 20. Again, verse 8 we already read. I'll read it again as we go through this entire commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. And here's the thing, it's not just for them. You or your son or your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that's in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. He's telling them, I want you to work 6, but every 7th day, I want you to take a day of rest. Because I'm not your Pharaoh, I'm your Father. And I created you, and I made you, so I know what you need. And he built that in for them to experience his rest. So what does that look like? How do I experience the rest of God? Well, it starts pretty simple, right in the text. Again, verse 8. Well, the first thing is that we remember, because that's the first word in verse 8. In fact, I think I have it there, just 8 isolated. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Remember. The Hebrew word for remember there is a word that means to consecrate. It means to sanctify, which means to set it apart, to take it, and it should not look like the rest of the days. If something is sanctified, it is set apart. If something is consecrated, it is not treated the same. The behavior, it looks different. And that is the command, to remember to set apart one day a week and keep it holy. Set it apart and spend time with God. So that's the first one. That was real easy, right out the gate. Remember, consecrate, sanctify. The second thing is to rest. Well, that seems easy, right? Oh, just kind of relax. Not just take a breath. I'm saying stop working. Unplug. Turn off social media. Leave your phone on the dresser when you walk out of your bedroom and spend time with your family or your friends. Don't let, well, it's Sabbath day, so I'm not at my job, but I got all these other things I need to do. No, in Sabbath, you embrace your limits. In Sabbath, you let go of the false idea that you are the world depends on you to keep it running. Guess what? You are not the one that makes the world turn. And if you take a Sabbath, things will go on without you. And it may take time for you to get into a rhythm of how you honor and celebrate your Sabbath. But once you're there, you will see how life-giving it is, and you'll wish you had done it a long time prior. We have the Father's example in Genesis 1. He created in 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested. But Sabbath is not about sitting at home and staring at the wall. I can't do that, Pastor. I can't just do nothing. I can unplug my phone. Okay, I can not find myself with busy work. I get that. But I just can't sit there and do nothing. No. Sabbath is not about that. Sabbath is actually involves recreation. And there's a word there, that recreation. Let's take a look at that. Recreation is it's recreation. Recreation. When you honor Sabbath and you keep it holy, you are recreating God's image within you. So what does recreation look like for you? What is it that you do that helps to recreate God's image within you? Read a book. Go to the beach. Play pickleball. Yeah, I know we got some pickleballers in the house. Maybe recreation to recreate God's image. You feel his pleasure when you go for a run. That ain't recreation for me. That work. Maybe it's grilling out. Whatever that may be, it should recreate God's image within you. And in doing so, you're in an active moment of worship. When you are recreating the image of God within you, when you are renewing your relationship with him by experiencing his rest, you are involved in an active time and moment of worship. Which leads to our third way of doing Sabbath. We remember, we rest, and we reflect. Take time to honor the Lord by reflecting on all that he's done for you. That's why we gather on Sundays for church. You see, originally, and the way that God created Sabbath, it was Saturday. In the Jewish culture, they celebrate Sabbath from sundown on Friday, 24 hours, to sundown on Saturday. It was changed in the early church era to Sunday, specifically to honor the day of Jesus' resurrection. He resurrected on Sunday, so we have moved that as a day to remember, to consecrate, to sanctify that day, set it apart so it doesn't look like the rest, as an act of worship in honor of Jesus' resurrection. And I get it. It's difficult to carve out an entire day for personal recreation, especially if you have kids. Man, my day of recreation means going to the ball field. My day of recreation means running them all over the place. Or maybe weekends you can't find time to rest and reflect because you work. Well, I'm going to extend some grace here. Don't be legalistic. The Jewish people made Sabbath legalistic, and before you know it, they ended up with 613 laws and rules of things that they weren't allowed to do on Sabbath. And I may tell you about some of those in a couple of weeks, of some of the ridiculous laws that they came up with trying to do the Sabbath. But offer yourself grace. Piece together your Sabbath. Maybe it's 8 hours one day and 3 hours another. And it may take time until you can work your way into a 24-hour period where you experience the complete rest of God. But get there how you can. Jesus said this to the Pharisees in Mark 2:27. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. When we fall into that legalistic mindset, Sabbath is not something that we should begrudgingly participate in. Oh man, I got to do Sabbath. It's a gift. It's something that we should desire to experience the rest of God. He built that in because he knows our bodies. He created us, and he knows our limitations. So we remember, and we rest, and we reflect. And when you reflect during Sabbath, what you begin to notice, as you reflect and it brings you recreate the image of God within yourself. And it's not you doing it. God is the one who recreates his image. But you have to make the space for that to happen. And when that happens, you begin to realize that the world does not depend on you to revolve. The more time you spend remembering, resting, and reflecting, the more time you are brought into that relationship with God, and you realize that he is bigger and bigger and bigger. Sabbath is the day to remember that he's God, you're not. He created the universe without lifting a finger. How did he create the universe? He spoke. He said, let there be, and it happened. He said, let there be light. Where do we get our light? From the sun. He said, let there be light. He didn't create the sun for days later. He's just that powerful. Light came on because he said so. Then he created our source of it later. And if he can do that, then he's got whatever you're dealing with, whatever is consuming your time, whatever is causing you to neglect the rest of God. Now you can come. So in this season of Sabbath, we remember. We rest, and we reflect. And then we reach the result. And that is that you will be revitalized. That's the fourth thing. We are revitalized. To revitalize something means to give new life. In the Old Testament, God gave the Israelites some very specific instructions on how they were to conduct their agricultural dealings. It was plant every year for 6 years. And on the seventh year, let the ground rest. Why? Well, because if you continue to plant, you will use all the nutrients in the soil. And your harvest will get smaller, will get weaker, will get less, until that ground is no good anymore. You can't grow anything out of it. So you plant for 6 years, and you take that 7th year to allow the ground to renew, to revitalize. God went even further with some of the instructions he gave his people. Every 7 years there's a Sabbath, and then every 7th Sabbath there's what's called a Jubilee, which is the Sabbath of Sabbaths. 49 years. The 49th year was a Sabbath, and then the 50th year was the year of Jubilee. So not only were they allowing the ground to rest on that 49th year, on that 50th year, all that was lost would be restored. Every Sabbath of Sabbaths, if you had to sell your property for some reason, your family's inheritance, on the year of Jubilee, that would be returned to your family. Everything, debts were canceled. Everything was returned to order. During the year of Jubilee, during this time of a Sabbath of Sabbaths. After all of these cycles. Why? Because God wanted to revitalize the soil. If you are not being specifically, intentionally honorable of the Sabbath, then you are, whether you realize it or not. You may feel like, man, I am full of energy. I don't need to slow down. I'll slow down eventually. You are depleting what God has placed within you, whether you realize it or not. And if you're, I'll tell you this, if you're productive now without honoring Sabbath, work a Sabbath in and watch how your production will soar. Watch how your life will be enriched. Because you plant for 6 years, then they take that year off. Then the harvest on the 8th year, when that resets and they begin again, the harvest is greater because the land had an entire year, a whole cycle that it was not being used, not being worked. And so that year 1 of the next harvest was always bountiful. When we remember Sabbath and we keep it holy, we are experiencing the rest of God. And when we come out of that Sabbath, then what we produce in our lives will be better. But we do it for His glory, not because people expect us to. And when God blesses what He does coming out of a Sabbath, the harvest is massive. Will you stand?